Welcome to Whispered Hiring, the podcast where we talk with senior leaders about how they find, vet, attract, and grow go-to-market talent. I'm Andy Mowat, founder of Whispered. Today, I'm joined by Alla Mezhvinsky, the VP of People at Glean. Alla has a background in people and talent acquisition, not just at Glean, where they're doing amazing things with AI, B2B exec. I'm going to cut this one completely and redo it again. I screwed it up on the Glean one.
No
Let me do it again.
worries.
I
No
think your
worries.
name got me, and I apologize. Starting over. Welcome to Whispered Hiring, the podcast where we talk with senior leaders about how they find, vet, attract, and grow go-to-market talent. I'm Andy Mowat, founder of Whispered. Today, I'm joined by Alla Mezhvinsky. Alla is the VP of People at Glean. Glean is this powerful technology that helps B2B companies or any company understand all their internal knowledge. I've spent so much time with the Glean team understanding how powerful it is, and we used it at Carta. Before that, Alla was in the talent acquisition and people side at Instacart, ClassPass, Square, and Zynga. This is the first time we've had somebody coming from the talent side, on the talent acquisition side, over to our podcast. So I'm really excited to dive in. And Alla, thank you for taking the time today.
Thank you for having me.
It's really neat. But before we hit record, we were talking about how companies get prepared to hire a role and the importance of that. I'd love to kind of have you share how you think about getting aligned with somebody before you kick off a search or before your team kicks off a search.
Yes, happy to dive into that. I think I've seen it done both ways, where there's a little bit of a reactive pressure to start a role. Someone thinks, "Okay, we need this role today. Let's go." And what I've often found is if you don't actually stop and create a plan and really think through what you're answering with this role, what problems are going to be solved with this particular role, where they're going to fit in the organization, what the organization is actually going to look like long term, what ends up happening is you're either not engaging the right candidates. You're not, you are engaging, you're attracting the right candidates, but you're not able to engage them because you don't have the full storyline and you're not able to articulate exactly what it is that you will want out of this individual. And then actually what the interview plan looks like. Yes, you can certainly build the plane as you fly and you can meet this person and that person. But what I found most effective and streamline and obviously provides the best candidate experience is if you actually think about who are the proper individuals to meet with the individual, to assess their fit, and also, how do you make it a fun and engaging experience rather than just another conversation. So streamlining that, I think, is really helpful both for the company that's doing the hiring and for candidate experience.
I couldn't agree more. I was talking with a talent partner at a VC firm this last week, and we were talking about how I'm just observing so many companies calibrate on the fly or calibrate. It's like literally they will chat GPT three job postings. They will put out probably more at the mid to junior levels, but they'll chat GPT three or four. I talked to a company the other day that had literally was interviewing VP and manager level people and trying to calibrate around what they needed. And it's painful for the candidate. It seems like it actually adds more time to the search rather than less as well too if they're not prepped. How do you think about like what makes the search longer or shorter in your minds?
Uh, Certainly not having that alignment, right? I've seen perfectly great candidates go through the process, but the interview panel is not quite sure what they're looking for, and so no one's
Yeah.
making the right decision, and so it's taking longer because no one's really certain around is this the right candidate because they haven't really aligned on what this right candidate should even look like. I also think what ends up happening is some of these searches, right, depending on who you're looking for, take a really long time. And I think we are programmed to almost solve for today. And what ends up happening is, like, let's say a search takes 3 to 4 months, especially if you're in a hyper growth company, the role that you originally thought of has probably changed in those 3 to 4 months. And so it also is really beneficial for you not to think about just what you need today, but what will this role and what type of support do you need 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months out as well, which is a different candidate in a lot of cases than kind of what the original scope might look like today. So
So
all
if
these
I
different
may,
things, like
yeah,
there's a lot of evolution that can happen that will kind of delay the search and the success of the search.
I love that. If I'm a hiring like a C-level person, I've just received my four head count from finance slash talent, and they're signed off. what's the best way to engage with a great talent team so that I can leverage well? I think everyone's always saying we got to get the roll up. How do we get sourcing turned on as fast as possible? Like, how can people become prepared to leverage great talent teams?
Yeah, I mean, I think that thought process, right? What exactly you're looking for and being able to truly articulate the type of experience you're looking for, the right candidate maybe coming to recruiting with a couple of profiles as examples is always really helpful. I do have to say, I think there's been a shift though in probably the last, I don't know, year, maybe 18 months, depending on how quickly organizations are adopting AI. I think it used to be fully kind of on the hiring manager to come to the intake meeting with recruiting with all of that already figured out. I've seen there be quite a shift where actually recruiting is being very proactive. They're
Mm,
getting some information about what the role looks like, and then they're able to use AI to actually propose the plan to the hiring manager. And now the hiring manager is not sitting there with a blank canvas and trying to figure out a new job description and a new interview panel. Their recruiters are able to say, okay, here's the research I've done, or here's what AI has come up with based on the five attributes that you've given me or the title that you've given me. And we're not saying we're moving forward with that, but it's much easier to then iterate on that than for someone to sit down and have to start fresh. So I think that shifted a lot where it's some minor information is coming from the hiring manager and then validated and approved and we go in more in depth. But now recruiting has become kind of the support for that as well.
I think you're absolutely right. It's there's both positives and dangers in it. I think the danger is that the recruiting team does a much more thoughtful job, and then the hiring manager puts it into their AI, and they're just dealing, and we don't actually have. No one's ever really taken the time to fully think through what do they need. They're more like dueling chat GPTs, which is interesting. I think the positive is exactly that. Like recruiting can be proactive. I always remember when I have to download to my recruiting partner, here are the questions I need you to ask. Because part of a uh, hiring manager's job, I think, is to give the recruiting partner those questions that they should ask. How should they evaluate? How could you do that? I think ChatGPT can also do a really good job there, right? Like, say you haven't hired for a role in GTM engineer before, you could come up with what are those three knockout questions and be able to do that side of
Yeah,
things.
absolutely. So I think it's just become much more of a partnership than a reliance is probably the way that I would describe it. I remember, back in the day, the hiring manager would ping you and say, "Hey, I want to hire for this role," and be like, "Great, we're going to do an intake meeting. Please fill out this form." And then
Hmm.
the hiring manager had this blank slate and job description, the whole thing, and it would take weeks because let's be honest, hiring managers are part of other teams. They have a ton of things on their plates, even though it's a priority. Sitting down and dedicating, 30 minutes, an hour, however long it takes is tough to do in a timely fashion. And so now I think we're able to kind of consolidate efforts and be a lot more prepared and move forward much faster.
That's really neat. I hadn't thought about that use of AI in the recruiting funnel, but it makes sense. Um, if I'm a hiring manager, how do I get to the front of the queue, right? Like I remember it's always there would be the great everyone's racing at the same time with their approved recs. What makes me part of my job in every role I've been at is when you get those recs, you hire them as fast as you possibly can. I really partner closely with hiring teams, but I'd love to know like how does your team prioritize those recs? How do I get to that front of that queue? How do I make myself easier to digest for the hiring team so that they can move fastest on mine? Because I feel like there are those quarterly releases of roles typically.
Yeah, I mean, look, I obviously don't know how every company does it, but I think it's less on how you get in front of recruiting and more of your alignment with your functional leader, right? Because ultimately, there's always going to be prioritization. We just got our head count for the year. We're certainly not opening every single role on day one that's been rolled out. It's supposed to be a year-long headcount plan, right? And so the functional leader has to decide, which roles are to be hired in Q1 versus Q3 and et cetera. And so it's less about aligning with the recruiting team or getting in front of them. It's more around aligning with your leader and your entire org around which roles in the big picture, not just your one sliver and not your one role, but in the grand scheme of things as the org, that particular org is building, How are you thinking about the pieces and how they're aligning? And so it's more that, and then recruiting comes in and like follows that plan. I think is how I like to do it, because it's certainly, you know, it's not for recruiting to decide which role should be hired first. I think it's truly like the company strategy and what we truly need sooner rather than later.
I agree with that. I think I always tried to have the people, the directors that rolled up to me and the VPs tell me what your priorities are and help me understand them. And I try to do the exact same with CRO or CEO to help them understand that. It's really important that not every role is created equally. You even have to be able to say, hey, I can do this. How about, so I oftentimes have run into those bottlenecks where they like recruiting can't resource every role right away. I actually feel fine playing that role as hiring manager and sourcing sometimes. Like, is that an effective way to go for maybe, obviously, if it's like a standard greenfield role or something like that where you've always got it open, those are probably you absolutely want to leverage recruiting because they've got that capability. But oftentimes I'll be taking like a director of GTM systems where it's very unique, very differentiated, and I've got maybe more expertise there. Like, how do you think about like hiring managers more proactively involved in the process as well too?
Absolutely. I mean, I think hiring managers should be involved in the process no matter whether they're sourcing or not, right? That the success of the role truly depends on how much the hiring manager leans in, to really partner, right? um, but I think in terms of, you know, sourcing themselves or really running a role, we try and set that expectation, right? If someone comes to us and says, hey, I really need this role open right now, whether or not we can open it now, it is, you know, not always a given. And so there's always the option and always the opportunity for us to say, hey, we need to close a couple more until we're able to fully dedicate resources to you. We can help post for the role, but we won't be able to take it on for, you know, 2 weeks, 3 months, you know, whatever the time frame is, and setting that expectation up front. And then the hiring manager can decide for themselves whether they're able to wait for recruiting to dedicate support to it, or whether they're going to be taking it on themselves. And we have managers who choose both. Um, I would say it's a good way for folks who haven't recruited before lean into it to understand actually the challenges and the complexities and the time that it takes to run a search. Because I think there is this sort of stigma that, like, oh, how hard can this be? But the reality is it's actually really challenging. It takes a long time. You have to be thoughtful about it. There's a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot of communication that's involved. What I found often is even if a hiring manager chooses to do it on their own, they end up actually kind of waiting for recruiting to take it over at some point. Not every, and some hiring managers are fantastic at it, but I've certainly seen some. In fact, I remember this distinctly where a couple of years ago I had a hiring manager who decided to do that, and then like wrote me this entire reflection of like, oh wow, I didn't realize how difficult and challenging and time consuming and thoughtful you have to be to run a search. And it's not just view a resume, schedule a meeting, and, you know, here you are, a candidate later.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's like you can get that first line of you go to your network, you ping 10 people, you get a couple candidates in, but that's not, you haven't market mapped it. You don't understand what greatness is. The scheduling logistics are absolutely
Exactly. Right.
overwhelming.
There's so many different pieces of the puzzle that I think people that kind of happen in the back that no one really realizes what it actually takes.
I love that. So, Whispered focuses on senior roles. I know you guys maybe hire less external recruiters. I'd be curious how you look at internal versus external. And then say you have a unique executive role where you don't have that expertise in house or you're hiring for something new. Like, how do you look at working with recruiters versus external versus internal?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a use case for all of it, right? And it really depends on, to your point, what you're looking for, what kind of network you have, what kind of network you can you can reach with your executives. So my rule of thumb is let's give it a couple weeks to see if we can do it on our own. And that usually is, hey, who does our network know? And can we build a pipeline with our own, you know, if we're looking for an executive role, you know, who does our CEO know? What can our VC partners bring to us? And after that sort of dries up, if that doesn't bring us and yield the right hire, then you sort of have to resort to a different strategy. And that's when we usually think about an external search.
That makes a ton of sense. And it's like you may find that great candidate in the
Yeah,
internal first. It's
absolutely. I've
yeah.
seen it both work both ways, but I think unless you try, it's hard to say. And look, if you're incredibly limited on resources and you don't even have the bandwidth inside and internally to go, do that internal search first, then engage a great agency and go and partner with them. But at least the philosophy that I have and the teams that I've led is like let's just try on our own first, and then we'll quickly turn to an agency and partner with them if we can.
Yeah, it's also, I think the cycles in recruiting are really interesting, right? Because I lived through the 2000, the 2020, 2021, 2022, where then recruiting was like, hey, please take this out and find an agency versus like other times. So I know we're tighter on how your staffing is as well, too.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's also use cases like I'm thinking about international, right? If you don't have any international presence, or if you really don't have the network or the um, even like the understanding of how recruiting is done in those countries, that's probably a quicker way to just say, hey, we don't even really have the brain power, the muscle, or like the understanding of how recruit where we how we'd get started. And so I've seen where we are quicker to engage external agencies when it is an international search.
I like that. Before we hit record, you're talking about how do you build out a new team? I'd be fascinated to your take on that. Is so what you're talking about is a completely new function within the company. Was that what we were talking about there?
How do, like recruiting team or which one?
Well, yeah, I think you and I have been talking about like, hey, you're building out a new role, a new function. Like, how do you go about doing that when
Oh,
you don't have
yes.
that function in the company? Whether that is the CEO shows up and says, "Hey, we need a forward deployed engineer function," or whatever it would be. Like, how do you go about and build out that new function from scratch?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of, goes back to how we started the conversation. Like, you have to have a plan. And, I can give an example. I was working for a company and we were standing up a brand new sales team, like never before, existed in the company. And I got an email from the president and, he said, we need 20 of these roles in 6 weeks. Okay. And then 2 days later, he's like, hey, I haven't talked to any candidates yet. It's 2 days later, first of all. No, no matter how what type of role, it's very unlikely that 2 days later you're going to be able to be at the stage where you're actually talking to the president of the company, yet alone for a function that's never existed for roles that we've never hired before. And it was
Hmm.
sort of this push and pull of I even envisioned it, to set up the team, the recruiting team for success. They can't just start talking with candidates without having the proper information of what it is that they're even talking about. What is the talk track? What is the role? What is the kind of like value proposition? What are they going to be doing? What function they're going to be reporting into? And so I really had to manage some expectations for a very eager leader, which I understand where the eagerness came from because it was going to stand up like a whole new function that was going to bring a lot of ROI into the company, and it eventually did. But also knowing and having the expertise in recruiting to say, I promise you that if we take the next 2 weeks to set the groundwork, the engine's going to rev up much faster than if we're trying to build the plan as we're flying it. And what's going to happen is you're not really going to find the right candidates because you're not even sure what you're looking for. And even when you find the candidates, you're not going to be able to engage them because you're not going to have answers to their questions. And so in this particular case that I described, I pushed back and I said, okay, just give me 2 weeks. And I partnered with our HR team to build like what is the org structure going to look like. I worked with our comp team to be able to speak to at least
Hmm.
some, like maybe it's not set in stone, but some directional comp expectations when we talk to candidates. And by the way, these were going to be sales roles, so you need to understand OTE and attainment and all of that. I worked with the leader who was sort of not this president, but another leader that was going to be part of the interview loops to try and understand like what is it that we're even going to be discussing with these candidates. And sure enough, like once we had those pieces of the puzzle, we were able to spin it up very quickly because every time that we got on the phone, we were able to answer questions. We were able to articulate what this team is going to do, what this role is going to look like, who they're going to report into, what the vision of the structure is going to be like versus the first couple of calls I remember doing, and it was like, oh, we'll get back to you. Oh, great question. And it just wasn't engaging the right candidates in the first place. So that goes to my first point, which is like, you got to build a plan. You got to build a plan. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be, not all the, uh, you know, T's crossed and I's dotted, but like there's got to be something on paper with a great understanding and alignment from the teams and the hiring recruiters that are going to be working on it.
I agree. I've learned it a lot. I mean, I've always believed it and understood it. And I think that pushback from talent partners in my mind has really made me a better hirer and a leader. But over the last year, as we've gotten deep into it with Whispered, I've really learned to appreciate it. I just watch companies cycle through candidates that are actually perfect fits for them when they
Just
haven't
spinning
thought,
wheels. Yeah,
yeah,
you're just
yeah.
spinning wheels. Yeah.
You're spinning your wheels, you're spinning the candidate wheels, you're spinning everybody's wheels.
Yeah, I do remember I was talking to an agency years ago, maybe ten years ago, and they said something that I thought was just brilliant. And I remember it so distinctly, even, years later. It was an agency that we were engaging for an executive role, and I think it was the CEO had asked this agency and said, "How long do you think it's going to take to fill this role?" And the agency recruiter sort of smirked and he said, "I can guarantee you that I'm going to present the right candidate to you within the first couple of weeks. What I can't guarantee is how long it's going to take you to realize is the right candidate." And it was just like perfect. That was perfect. So I think that's something I think about often. That's why I always encourage leaders to really think through, like, what is it that they're looking for, so they're able to spot those signals early.
Yeah, yeah. You don't know it. I talked to a company the other day and they just literally they're just all over the map. And so it's fun to see.
Yeah.
One question I'm dying to ask because you're in AI and talent leader that's been grown up through this whole had multiple amazing companies. How is AI screening on resumes working for you internally? I know the tech, I know how it works. I think just given the fact that a attractive company like a Glean, you're gonna for a meaty role, you're gonna get 2,000 applications. Like, how do you sift through all those, and what's the advice for folks? And generally, my question is probably geared more like director and up versus like the junior level ones, but I'd be
Yeah.
fascinated to hear how you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're still in discovery mode
Hmm.
around that, and I say this because there is hesitation. There's legal implications that we have to
Yes.
think about, right? Like, AI should not be making the hiring decision for you. Um, but how do you use AI to help you get to a set of candidates that you can decide on? And so we've played around with a bunch of different ideas and tools, and we ultimately still look at candidates, and we are the ones that are either moving them forward or rejecting them. But we are using AI, filters and analysis to try and like figure out like what are the right profiles that actually match the roles that we're hiring for versus not. And so it's still, I think people are still getting comfortable with what it means, but
Yeah.
there is still some hesitancy. There's still some legal implications that we have to think through. So it's like, I would say right now we're in maybe more of like playing around with it than fully using it. And I talk to a lot of TA leaders very often, and I think everyone is in that same mindset of you got to be careful, because the last thing we would want is to reject candidates that are perfect fits because the AI didn't work so well, or like you still want that human touch. And so it's more just about using AI to enhance those experiences and maybe help recruiters kind of sit through that faster. But there's no like perfect answer for it yet. I'm sure at some point something will click, but for now it's more like research and development, I would say.
Of that. At Whisper, we're approaching in like 1,000 people. They don't apply to us because we more help them, but 1,000 people sharing their profiles and talking to our AI every month. And I think what we've kind of chosen is we've built the AI score, but we still have a human score.
Exactly.
And so the AI score is effectively ordering those people to be evaluated. And we're constantly like learning and tweaking the AI, but then we're constantly regressing it back to what does the human say? And if the human puts it as an A, but it's scored at like a -10, like we're gonna take a look at those ones. And so that's
Yeah.
been our like process to go through this
Yeah,
side.
a little bit of discovery. I mean, I think what the hard part is AI is helping both sides, right? The candidates are
Yeah.
using AI to tailor their resumes to this perfect job description. And then now companies are trying to figure out, how much of it is like what exactly does it say on the resume and how much of it is AI being tailored towards it. So everyone, I think, is playing around with it and trying to find the right balance of where do we use it? How often do we use it? How is it helping us? And, you know, that's
I,
we're, we're
I
all
agree.
we're all learning. We're all learning.
I was early at Upwork, and I got to learn a lot of the matching side. 7 years ago or 5 years ago, when I would put up an Upwork post, I'd put it up and I'd get 100 just bad responses, right? They would just be really bad, and they would filter in over the course of like 7 to 10 days. And I put up one maybe 6 months ago, and I got 100 amazing responses in 10 minutes,
Hmm.
clearly all AI'd, clearly very well. I used to put in a question at the bottom, which was just at the, like, hey, if you haven't read this question, like, don't bother applying. And people would still apply anyway, and they would just be like, hey, and now they don't. Now the AI reads those questions and does that. And so this is kind of part of Whisper, which is I think we see. I'd be curious your take, but I see companies opting out of posting more roles because of the AI slop that's coming in on the other side as well too. And it's such a balance, right? Like it's a there. I have in my last two roles hired great people that applied right to the front door, and I deeply believe in it. But I'm also like it gets hard when you can't find the noise anymore because you can use Teal to customize your resume to exactly the job description. You can write a perfect cover letter. You can make yourself look exactly like what the job description says, even if you aren't that. And so I'm fascinated to hear how this evolves and curious your take.
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, like it's evolving, right? And we're all part of it. We're all learning how it's evolving. We're all trying to understand both sides of it. I think I I did a talk last week, and I think the data, the stat that they shared is there's now twice as many applicants per role than there's even like since last year. And I think part of it is it's been much easier to apply, right? You're not redoing your resumes. It's not taking as long. AI is helping you with that. And it's it's creating a lot of sort of like noise and volume and sifting through that. So I don't have the perfect answer for that. I don't know that anyone does because I talk about this often. I think everyone is really trying how to do it responsibly. Like that's maybe the key word is like how do we do this responsibly from all sides.
I love that. You're right, it is because everybody that does apply puts their heart and soul into it and doesn't and it does reflect on your brand as a company, right? Like when you say no to somebody, if you put it out and you have 2,000 applicants, you've got to say no to, at least with a very quick short email to like everyone but the top 30 or so. And so it definitely is. Companies have to think about it from the brand. Shifting over, maybe another AI topic. Like I remember when we talked about, or I talked with Leah and your hiring manager around the RevOps role. They were very passionate about we need to have this person deeply understand and be fluent in AI. And I said, listen, if you're going to go talk to these folks, make sure that you know what RAG is or understand how to do these things. And I think it's becoming more important. But I'd be curious, like, how do you, in the interview process, have you found ways to assess for AI fluency at this point in time, or how did both you and the company think about that?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the role, but there are certain roles where like that is it is not a nice to have, it is a must have. And so there are we have some roles that require you to build an agent and we give case studies around it, we give prompts, and part of the interview is actually you building this agent to the interviewer to this panel. So there's that. Other roles that maybe aren't building agents within the company. It's really testing that basic knowledge and basic understanding of what AI is, what are the different use cases, the difference between general AI and prompts versus agentic AI and how it's built. Obviously, engineering leans more technical versus some of the sales roles really lean into just having the like basic concept to be able to explain it. So we're continuing to actually evolve that as well and figuring out how best to do it. There's many tools that now kind of allow you to do that as well in better, more efficient ways. But I would say we try, even in recruiting, right? The role of a recruiter is starting to evolve a little bit as well. It's not so much about, how many hires you've made or what your offer acceptance rate is or what your pass through rate is. It's now, how are you using AI to be more productive, more efficient? How it's helping you. And, when we talk to recruiters or when we hire recruiters, they're not building agents, but it is part of the conversation to, same sort of idea, to understand their knowledge and how they've used it before. And I would say, at least what I have, there's certain roles where it's really hard to find someone who is a subject matter expert in it. And I think recruiting is one of them. Like, it's still fairly new in the recruiting space. And so to not hire someone because they're not AI fluent is not yet the direction that we've taken, for example. What I think about that is like how curious they are and how
Hmm.
much they want to lean into learning, because ultimately they're going to be joining an AI company, and we have an entire sort of like internal goal to make sure that our employees are AI fluent. And so it's more just how curious they are, how much they're going to lean into it, and can they, when they join Glean, for example, be part of that evolution and be part of figuring out how recruiting, HR, et cetera, uses AI. And we've had great people who didn't come with a lot of AI experience who've really leaned into that and have become like the team AI advocates and are now training others and new hires to to utilize the prompts and agents that we've built.
I like that. We had a Whispered member who's like in their late 40s now, and he said, "Hey, when I was in my 30s, I used yeah, I realized he's like, I realized it wasn't an ageism thing. It was a mental flexibility
Mental,
and a mental
yes,
curiosity thing.
yeah,
It's like you can be that meant you can have that curiosity or you cannot. I think it's become you could in the old days be a leader of people and not get into the weeds. And I feel like that totally has changed now where everybody needs to get the intellectual curiosity and the ability to like click down to multiple levels is almost a non-negotiable.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
Um, case studies take home case studies dying because of AI, right? Because companies can. I talked to a CEO the other day. I AI'd it, and then they gave it to the candidate, and then the candidate AI'd it, and then they come on in and present it, and you're like, ah. So I'm hearing more and more companies are saying, listen, like, don't do a case study, don't do a take home. We're going to have you come in and do a whiteboard.
Yep, exactly. Whiteboard or just like real time. We just tell them, hey, we're going to build an agent and we're going to play around with it and do it together. So I think it's more of those real time assessments that are becoming more popular.
I think so, and people need to be able to think on their feet versus use AI as a crutch.
Yeah, although there's now, tools that say that they can detect when someone used AI to do their thing. The funny sort of irony is, I would say 18 months ago, even a year ago, people were saying, how do we make sure that a candidate didn't use AI? And now people are saying, well, actually, we do want them to use AI because we want them to be AI fluent. But is this balance between, do they not know the sort of, do they not have the expertise, and so they're having AI do the work for them that they otherwise wouldn't be able to do well? Or is this individual, they can do it well, they know, they have knowledge, they have the skill set, they have the experience, and now they're like enhancing that with AI? And so it's this weird fine balance that everyone's trying to find right now. But there are certain tools, like I was just talking to the product team at Code Signal, and they're
Mm.
really working to try and figure out, better ways. And they already have a lot of AI, like cheating, or ways to detect it. But also they have assessments that are helping with AI assessments too. So interesting dilemma.
I feel like that's a really good one. I think on my view, I remember talking at a dinner to a VC who's insistent that he could figure out if an email was written with AI. I'm like, no, like I think you might think you could, but it's hard. I want you to use AI, but what I really, really want, which maybe goes to your point on the in-person and the whiteboard, is I want to know, did that take you 10 minutes and be like, check out what I can do? Or are you sitting there plugging it in for 17 hours? And that's the part that, so I talked to this one woman that was really on one of our podcasts. She actually coded up her own AI interview on Lovable which I love the idea, which is it's going to give you the question, and when you push go, the clock starts, and you only have X amount of time. So I think for me, something that I'm watching a lot is time constraint interviews.
Hmm. Yes.
Kind of like SAT. I could probably get better on the SAT if I had more time to think through every one, but like being able to put a time constraint on it would tell me if you're a world-class AI builder or you're over here on the side asking how to build in this tool over here. And so I
Yeah,
think
I almost
that's the
wonder if it
part
like
that
goes both ways. Like it shouldn't take you less than, because then you're just cutting and pasting from the AI tool, and it shouldn't take you more than because you're probably either not using AI or overthinking it. Like it almost, I feel like it's got to be some analysis of like what is the perfect time that it should take.
you just nailed one of my favorite coachings for people that I work with, which is the 5-20 minute rule. Do not ask me if you haven't spent at least 5 minutes on it, because I need you to put your own thoughts in it. But if you're cycling on it after 20, come talk to me. And so I think yeah, I think there's that, yeah, that less than, more than, which gets really interesting. That's just neat. How do you like any thoughts on referencing candidates? I mean, we've now had 40 top CROs, CEOs, CMOs on the podcast, and it is by far the number one signal for hiring managers.
Yeah.
But I'm curious how a TA team thinks about like the back door, particularly the back. I think the front door, I kind of believe that everyone should do them and they should call them. But I'm curious how you think about like the backdoor references.
Look, I think backdoor references are certainly helpful, but I do think there's always like two sides to the story, so you have to be careful. Like I would probably advise people not to just get one because you never know what the
Yeah.
interaction was, you never know what, what capacity, what experience they have. They might have very limited knowledge, and maybe that happens to be the negative one, even though like 90% of what that person did or that candidate did was great. So I would advise to try and get a couple of sources if you're doing backdoor references. But actually, I have a pretty like interesting way that we do references that are provided by the candidate. And I would say
Hmm.
that for the most part, I view them as fairly stale. Like you're certainly going to give someone that's going to speak highly of you, or at least going to be more positive. And so, how do you turn those conversations to be much more like context driven?
Mm.
Have an agent that will or prompt that will take all of the feedback from the interview loop and come up with questions based on what that interview loop surfaced, positives, negatives, things they want to dive into, and create a set of questions that we then ask the references that the candidate provided. And so they become much more structured, they become much more focused on the things that you're still maybe unsure about, and you're having much more like context driven conversations rather than would you work with this person again, and it's sort of these basic questions that have been around for a long time, and how do you turn those conversations into actually like give you more context that you need. So that's been fantastic.
I love that one. That is like best practice for using the meta view type tools to be able to do that. I think the other two that I've heard that I really love is every employee's resume gets loaded into a database. And when a new applicant comes in, you can use AI to figure out, did this applicant overlap with anybody that's in our employee database? And so then you can ping the random, like, hey, here's this support rep of like, hey, we have this VP over here. Like, what was their reputation at? And so you can kind of use like your internal employees as backdoor references, which I like that one. And then the other one I heard that I really liked was just ask people like, hey, so we all have people that talk well about us. What would those people say? And then you say, we all have the people that would like not talk well about us. Like, what would those people say? And then like, who are those people?
Yeah.
And so you can kind of use the recordings to source the back channel people as well too, which
Yeah,
gets interesting.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow. Well, this has been amazing. Thank you for like just deep diving with us. I think the perspective of knowing what's real and what's not in AI, and how a company that I deeply respect in the world of AI, and everyone always asks me like, what are your top 10 AI companies? And you guys have been on the list for some time. So
Oh,
I,
well, thank you.
I really, no, no. And you clearly do great work. And you've got Leah who introduced us, who I used to work with. So thank you so much for taking the time. I learned a ton today and really enjoyed it.
So nice to meet you as well, Andy. Really appreciate you having me on the podcast.
I can't wait to share it. Thank you. It was awesome.